It's been called the never-ending question. The Security Council of the United Nations and therewith the world body itself is primarily in the hands of 5 UN Charter members. Now, the premium arm of the UN does have 10 rotational non-permanent members too, but since 1945, the real power to veto whatever doesn't suit their own interests still rests in the hands of the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Russia and China. But Asia's other superpower, emerging India, represents a sixth of mankind and has for long led the demand to be admitted to the elite club with full veto power. The Big Five are reluctant to share power with any new aspirants, and India's demand remains unaddressed. India has now made a fresh pitch on the banks of New York's East River. As I mentioned, India's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York, Syed Akbaruddin, has asked an intergovernmental group examining the question of expanding the Security Council to cut out the red tape which has long entangled and held up the urgently needed reform. Ambassador Akbaruddin said, and I quote, "We seek a structured format of a single document that can be negotiated one issue at a time, with the usual understanding that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed." Now, the United Nations was formed in 1945 by the 5 charter members who immediately established themselves as the power brokers of the world body. In 2018, that is 73 years later, democracies have changed, as have the global stature of nations such as India, Germany and Brazil. All 3 nations have for long knocked on the Security Council's door. If it continues to remain shut, it will only lead to the further degeneration and demise of the organization, already under sharp criticism for its bloated bureaucracy and ineffectiveness in resolving pressing global issues. All right, joining me now is WION Senior Foreign Editor Padma Rao from the newsroom. Good afternoon, Padma. What do you make of India's new push, as it were, for UN reform?
Well, I'm glad to see there is a new push, a new impetus, because I think India is also beginning to sense the fact, sense its rising importance in the world arena, and realizes that it's now or never. This is a good time to strike, but possibly a much better time, or the best time to strike in the last 70 years. As you know, Ramesh, I was a United Nations reporter for a television channel in New York in the mid-90s, and this question of reforming the Security Council has been dangling in the air since that long and even beyond. In fact, there was an Italian envoy who has chaired one of these many groups, and Syed Akbaruddin was addressing yet another such group formed to examine the question of expanding the Security Council. Because, as you know, the Security Council was set up by the charter members, essentially the war victors of World War II, and that included Russia and China for various other battles. These 5 members immediately occupied the most important 5 seats in the Security Council and formed this elite club. And today there are geostrategic compulsions and, in fact, unilateral compulsions which often make them, veto something that their country doesn't like. Now, obviously, that is against the essence of the United Nations. It's a global body, and India, which is the other big emerging superpower other than China in Asia, does represent 1/6 of the population of the world, and it is really, way beyond high time that India were represented with as a full-fledged member of the Security Council with a veto.
Right. Also, Padma, every world leader visiting New Delhi supports India's claim or stake to become a permanent member in an expanded UNSC. But nothing seems to be happening or moving on the ground. How realistically speaking is it possible, in your estimation, that the UN reform will happen soon, especially with regard to India's or other countries' demand for veto power along with the membership of the UNSC?
Well, I think much will depend on, a kind of a give and take. I mean, all the big five of the Security Council have various bilateral issues at stake with India, matters that they would like to pursue. So it really depends on what kind of backroom bargaining there is going on. But I don't think India would settle for such a deal, because that would be essentially, again, going against the grain of the world body and the United Nations, which is supposed to be, actually the world's sort of a democratic organization representing the entire world. And if this is going to be a backroom negotiation and based on bilateral gives and takes, then I don't think India will subscribe or play ball. But you know, if you're asking me how realistic I think it is, frankly, I'm an old cynic. I have been watching this forever, as I said, since the mid-90s, and I don't think it's ever going to happen. What I do see already happening is the growing importance of other global organizations and gremiums, and I see also that they will eventually slowly overtake the United Nations in importance and stature.
Right. On that note, thank you, Padma. That was WION Senior Foreign Editor Padma Rao joining us with all the latest from the newsroom.